Alright, how's it going, y'all? So today we're going over a complete guide to setting up a Synology NAS. This right here is a DS925 Plus, and we're going to completely go over how to set it up. All the way from basically plugging everything in, getting everything hooked up, to setting up all the proper volumes and everything you need to go to get up and running. And then at the end, we're going to go over pretty much the next steps. All the other features, and I've got a lot of guides that I'm going to point out, and I've actually even built a playlist of really useful tutorials for people who are just getting started with Synology NAS. This will also work for people who are just setting up a new one and are already somewhat familiar as well. Okay, so we're going to start off with basically a hardware overview. This right here is a Synology NAS. It is a DS925 Plus. DS means disk station, so it's kind of a desktop unit. They also make rack mount units, but the functionality is identical, just the form factor is different. On the front right here, the most important thing is our number of bays. This is a 4-bay NAS, and it is a 25 model. The reason it is a 925 and not a 425 is this also has the ability to add in a 5-bay expansion unit from this port back here. So, up front are 4 slots for 3.5-inch mechanical hard drives. And the way you install them is pretty simple. You pop out the tray by just kind of flicking it open. And then right here, you've got what's called a toolless design for these hard drives. You essentially pop out these little side plastic tab things. It's kind of confusing the first time you do it, but what you do is you stick your finger right there and you pop them out, and then you'll see each of them has 2 kind of pins in it. Those are used to essentially hold the hard drive in place. So you are going to take your hard drive, and what you're going to do is you're going to place it in the tray, and the way you know you've done it properly is when the teeth, the gold teeth, that's actually what the Synology uses to talk to the hard drive. It needs to be by the black plastic piece, just like this. And if it's like that, the pins will go back in when you snap them back on in. There are these rubber grommets. Don't remove those. Those just help add friction and reduce vibrations. So that is how you add it on in there. And then you just kind of slot it back on in. I've already got 2 other drives in here, and you don't have to fill all the bays from the start. You can start with just 2 drives, and then as you need more space, add in extra drives, and it'll just expand out the space like that. Finally, if you've got a 2.5-inch SSD, your NAS came with screws, and there's 4 screw holes right here that you actually mount them from below. So it's a little different, but the teeth go in the exact same place. So to put SSDs in there, 2.5-inch SSDs, which is what this guy is right here, you take your screws, you take out your right pins, and you mount it so the teeth are in that exact same position. And then there's 4 screw holes on the bottom that you just screw on in. And that way it's the exact same interface, but we're not going to be installing one of those right now. So the important part are the hard drives. You can also see there's indicator lights right here that say when the hard drives are being active, as well as for the network ports. And below us, we also have, in this case, 2 slots for M.2 NVMe SSDs. And I actually have one in here. If you've got one, you go ahead and pretty much just kind of slot it in there like a gum stick. It's kind of hard to see on this. There's a good manual in the box that actually tells you how to do this. But you just slot it in, push it down, and it should stay locked in place. It feels like you're breaking it. Don't force it too hard, but there is a bit of like a flex to it slightly, and that's just how it works. It's kind of hard to do the first time. Don't force it. And then finally, you can add in RAM as well, depending on what you've got. But those are our basic, just add-in pieces. Then on the back, there's the really important stuff, and the single most important thing of a NAS is the network interface. A NAS stands for Network Attached Storage, and so everything you do with this is over the network. It is not like an external hard drive where you just plug it into your computer and use it like that. This is its own computer, and the way your computer talks to this computer is through the network. So to get the fastest speeds, that is over a wired Ethernet connection. So you plug this into your Wi-Fi router, and then you also plug your computer into the same Wi-Fi router. And now they can talk to each other over a wired connection. But because it's a NAS, it also works any way networks work as well. So you can also talk to it over Wi-Fi. The only downside with that is Wi-Fi is just slower than wired Ethernet. And so to get the best speeds, you always will want a wired connection. But if you're only transferring a few photos, it'll work anywhere in your house or business just over Wi-Fi. There is also on this unit that expansion port I was talking about right here. One thing to note, it is a USB-C port, but you can't plug in a USB-C hard drive into here. It will not work. It's only for expansion. And then there are multiple USB-A ports on this device, and you can plug into those like an external hard drive, which we'll get to the end of this video. I highly recommend picking up an external hard drive, leaving it plugged in this thing all the time, and just telling the NAS every night, anything that's changed, back up to that external hard drive, just in case anything ever happens. Okay, so that's our basics. We pretty much have the unit ready to go, and all we're going to need to do is go ahead and plug this into our Wi-Fi router or a network switch. If you're not super familiar with that stuff, somewhere, wherever you're getting your internet from, there's probably a box with like 4 network ports on it. And you're going to take one of the cables that came with the box and plug it from the NAS into that device. And then the NAS will be able to talk to everything else on the network. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. We're going to go ahead and plug it on into my network right here. Okay. So I've just gone ahead and done 2 things. I've plugged the power cable in, and I've plugged my Ethernet cable that goes to my Wi-Fi router into the back. You'll notice that the NAS has either 1, 2, or 4 network ports on the back of it. For the most part, it does not matter which one you plug into. There's one exception. If it's labeled as management, don't plug into that one. But the rest of them should all function pretty much the same. It's for more advanced functionality and different network speeds and other things like that. But when there's just 2, they're identical and both can be used. But to start, just plug in one. Now, if you've added an optional 10 gigabit add-in card or anything like that, for this first time setup, if you've added an additional network port to the NAS, plug it into the built-in network port, the one that actually came physically installed on the unit, not an add-in card. You can later add it to the add-in card, but the first time setup does not work over a add-in card. So now that that's done, we're just going to hit the power button, and we're going to wait a couple of minutes. We're going to wait until we hear a beep, and that way we know we can access this thing. By the way, while we're waiting, if you'd like to hire me, I do full IT consulting on Synologies and other just small business IT. There's a link for that down in the description below, and we just basically handle all this stuff over Zoom. And that was the beep we were waiting for. That basically tells us, hey, the NAS has booted on up and is ready to talk to us. So now in a web browser, we're going to go to find.synology.com, and it is going to search out and hopefully find our NAS. If this does not find your NAS, make sure you're plugged into the right network cable. It's fairly often for people to accidentally plug into the wrong router. So maybe your internet service provider, your ISP, has a router, and then you got something like a TP-Link Deco that is also what you're actually using for Wi-Fi. Whatever is actually making your Wi-Fi, make sure to plug into that. But in this case right here, we can see, I've got a series of NAS that's listed right here, but we can see this guy right here. It'll say Synology NAS, and it is not installed. So I'm going to hit connect, EULA, and now we can see it up at the top of our screen. We've got the IP address that the NAS has on our local network. And we're going to go ahead and just hit install. This will automatically download and install the OS we're looking for. And note, this will format the hard drives that are in our system. So if you already had like a bunch of family photos on these hard drives and were planning on using them, this will not work. So you have to make sure these are new hard drives, or hard drives that you don't care get formatted. And now with the 25 models, they need to be Synology drives on the approved list, unfortunately. So now it is just going to go ahead and do the install of the actual operating system on here. And the way to actually install this is it installs it across every single one of the drives. And so your settings are kind of stored on all of them. It's going to take a couple of minutes to do this, and then we'll go to the next steps. So now, once it's gone ahead and done the first time install, it's going to go ahead and reboot, and then eventually this will refresh and we'll start our setup. All right, and so with that second beep, we now know that it has installed. and we should see it saying now it's doing the built-in packages, but we are going to be actually ready to do all of our stuff here in a minute. While we are waiting for this last bit to finish, I do also want to talk about one of the most important factors when it comes to the performance of the NAS, and that is your network connection. So your transfer speeds to the NAS really boil down to one key thing: how fast your network connection is to the NAS. So if you're hardwired, you're going to have a much faster connection than if you're talking over Wi-Fi. Then you also can upgrade to 2.5 gigabit connections to have even faster connections. So really, whenever you're thinking about speed, it's all about how fast your computer's network connection is to the NAS. It's going to be way, way, way faster to access files on the NAS when you're on the same local network asset versus if you're in Australia. So it's one of those things where that's a really important consideration for transferring files to the NAS. And now we have been finally brought to the DSM 7.2 install screen, and we're going to go ahead and hit start. The first thing we're going to go ahead and do is name this NAS, and this is like the computer name. This is what's going to show up in like Windows File Explorer and macOS Finder as the server name. I'm just going to name it DS925. And now we want to create an administrator account. Really, this is a user account, and this is the account you're going to use to log in. I'm going to just use my first name, Will, but if you want to, you can also be explicit and create yourself two accounts, one for yourself and then one for admin. And this is very common in larger office deployments because it allows your IT people who do have admin access to be able to use regular logins for their main stuff. And then if they need that extra permission that an admin has, be able to use that. But if you're just getting started, just use your first name. And what you're going to do is you're going to create an account for every single person who needs to access this thing. You can create something like Office Computer, Office User, but it's not something I recommend doing. Instead, I really recommend creating a login for every single person. And that way, when you're reading through logs, it's just really clear who did what. But we're going to cover all that in the later half of this video. For now, we're just going to add in an administrator account and a strong password. And we're going to hit allow this NAS to be displayed in Web Assistant. That is where if you can't find the IP address, it will be able to go to find.synology.com and it will find it for you. We are not going to save it in this case. There is a little bit complexity with how you access the NAS and how you save it. What I would really recommend doing is when you set this password, if you use a password manager and that was a random password, create a manual entry in your password vault, just called Synology, and then add all the addresses to it. If you just use the automated add password to vault, it really depends on how you're accessing it based off of the URL. And when it comes to a NAS, there's a lot of ways to access it, a lot of different URLs, this top part of our screen right here, that may or may not work in different cases. So I would really recommend adding it manually into your password manager if you use one. Okay, so now we've got the option to choose how we would like to handle updates. And for most people, I would recommend install important updates. But if you want it to be completely automatic, you want to basically just set this thing and forget about it, you can say auto update DSM to all packages. So that way, essentially it automatically updates anytime there is one. And it's not a big deal. It'll do it like at 3 a.m. But for people who might be using like virtualization or other things like that, and you want it to only go down when you need it to, unless there's a major security risk, then choose this. But if you just want it to be set and forget, choose all packages to the latest version. And now, if you want to, you can create a Synology.com account. This is entirely separate from your local NAS account. Everything on the NAS is local to this physical box. This is a Synology.com account, and the reason I would recommend creating one and setting it up is it'll send you email notifications if something's wrong. So if one of the drives is going bad, or there's something weird going on, it'll be able to email you. And so I would recommend setting one up. I'm just going to assign it to mine, but you can also create it there. If you want to, we can also create what's called a Quick Connect ID here. This is a way to access your NAS remotely. So if you want to be able to use the mobile apps and be able to access stuff anywhere in the world, set up Quick Connect ID here. This pretty much creates like a URL on the internet that your NAS is accessible from. It does have some security implications because now your NAS can be accessed outside your local network, But if you don't open up any ports, it's generally quite secure, but we're going to skip over that for now. But if you are looking to use the mobile apps, I'd highly recommend enabling it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to enable automatic backups and email notifications. This only applies if you did sign into Synology. And this right here is by far the most useful thing. This will automatically send me an email if there's an issue with this NAS, which is really nice to have. And now it's just going to go ahead and run. All right, so now it will give you the option to automatically install Synology Drive, Office, and Photos. These are three pretty core apps that a lot of people find useful. So we're going to go ahead and hit install now, and it will install them after we've done our next steps here. If you want to do everything manually, you can say no thanks, and then install these later from the package center. But to keep it really easy, we're going to go ahead and say yes to that, and I'm going to show you the default configuration that comes when you do that. You're going to add in an extended warranty. I never do it. And we're going to skip over full two-factor authentication and instead make sure we are using adaptive MFA at minimum. What this does is this is like what your bank does. If you log into the NAS from a IP address that's outside of your local network, so from the internet, on a new device, it's going to send you an email with a code. So it's really useful to have, and it's automatically enabled, but we're going to go ahead and show you how to make sure it is also enabled. And now we're just going to go ahead and create our first storage pool. So this is essentially how we're taking these multiple hard drives together and making them into one brick of space. So if you're not familiar with RAID, there are a few different ways it works, and we're going to go over the really basic stuff here. There are a lot of different RAID types to choose from. With Synology, in this specific configuration, we can choose SHR, RAID 1, RAID 5, Basic, JBOD, RAID 0. SHR, RAID 1, and RAID 5 are all redundant RAIDs. SHR is Synology Hybrid RAID that kind of makes RAID a little bit easier to understand and does some cool stuff by allowing you to actually be a little bit more space efficient when it comes to the space on your hard drives. I've got a tutorial that I'll leave a link down in the description below that covers all of this stuff in depth. But what all of these redundant RAIDs do for you is they spread all of your data across all of your drives, and they either have one or two drives of fault tolerance. That means that if one of your drives fails, well, you just keep all of your data and everything just keeps running. You slot it in a new drive, you hit rebuild, and everything just keeps going. And so if a hard drive fails, you're not out of a loss. Now, this is not a backup. For example, if you delete a file, it's going to be deleted off of all of the drives at the same time. Same thing if there's a crash or anything. So you can't reliably use this as a backup. Really, it's a redundancy to make sure if something does go wrong, you don't have to go to your backups, and the NAS just keeps running. And in general, they will cost you the amount of drives of redundancy that they give you. So SHR, this is specifically SHR1, one drive of fault tolerance, will essentially take the single largest hard drive in the pool, and it's kept for redundancy. And so then all the other drives, you add up their storage capacity. Synology has a very useful RAID calculator that I'll leave a link down in the description below too as well. That kind of helps you understand it. So you can go in, you can plug in how many drives you've got and of what size. And this will tell you how much storage capacity you've got, and you can play around with it by adding more drives in. If you're just new to this, I'd probably recommend SHR1, which is what this guy is right here, if you've got 6 drives or fewer, and SHR2 if you've got 7 drives or more. But if you know your different RAIDs, you can enter those in here. We're going to choose SHR1 and choose our SATA HDDs. You'll also see I've got this NVMe for the caching that we're not going to choose. And so this is what's going to group all of our hard drives together to one big spool of data. And we're going to select them on out. For our volume allocation size, we're going to just choose max. You almost certainly do not need multiple volumes. There's some very niche cases for having multiple volumes, but unless you know you need multiple volumes, just hit max here. Now we can choose the file system, choose BTRFS. There are very, very, very few reasons to ever choose ext4. Choose BTRFS. If you know you need ext4, you probably don't, but you can choose it there, but choose BTRFS. And finally, the last thing here is the encryption. So encryption does not protect you from hackers or anything like that. The only thing encryption protects you from is somebody breaking into your house or office and walking off with this thing. If somebody walks off with this thing and the data is not encrypted, and they know how to pull data off of a bunch of hard drives in a RAID, they would be able to get all the files on it. But encryption doesn't protect you from anybody external to the network or anybody who is like hacking into it. The only thing encryption ever protects you from is physical access. Otherwise, it doesn't help you. So if you want that encryption, you've got sensitive files on here that you want to make sure nobody can break into your house and steal. You can enable it here, but it is going to then download a file. If you lose this file, the data on your NAS is useless. That is the problem with encryption. Encryption is very good. That file that it's going to download is what's called the encryption key. This encryption key is what stores the ability to undo the encryption on the hard drives so you can actually get your data. If you lose that key and you need it, your data is gone and you can't restore from it. So make sure if you do enable encryption to save that file multiple places in ways you know you will be able to get to. One thing I would recommend doing, email it to yourself, send it to a Google Drive. The only time this ever comes into play is if somebody's physically got access to the NAS. So even if you were to post it on Twitter, that person would have to see the tweet and break into your house to be able to do anything with it. So you don't have to worry about it being incredibly sensitive, because if somebody breaks into your Google Drive and into your office, things have already gone very, very, very bad for you, and this is probably not the weakest link in your system. But for this demo, we're going to go ahead and show that encryption. And now we're going to come up with what's called a vault password. This is pretty much used to add in additional encryption keys to your vault. This is not the important password to remember. If you lose this password, as long as you've got the file, you're fine. But if you lose the file that's about to be downloaded here, you are not fine. I am overly cautious with that explanation. I've had a lot of cases where I've gotten phone calls from businesses who unfortunately have lost this key. An IT guy set it up and then never filed away in the right place, who left years ago. And it's a hard thing to say of, yeah, we can't get your data back. You have to restore from backups, or some of them did not. So seriously, if you are enabling this, make sure you've got the encryption key in somewhere that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely, I cannot overstate how important that is. It is now going to download that file, and you are then going to have to say, my recovery key is stored safely and I understand the consequences of losing it. So that file that just got downloaded, before you click this, upload it to your Google Drive, upload it to whatever safe thing you've got, upload it to your password manager, upload it to 12 different places. Go ahead and do that now before saying okay. And now it is going to build our volume. All right, so now we have built what's called the storage pool and the volume. For most people, you're going to kind of think of this as the same thing. Technically, the storage pool is what brings all these hard drives together into one big hard drive. And then the volume is what makes that into what's called a file system that you can actually read and write from. But for most people, you can kind of think of them as one big thing that just gives you the ability to store a bunch of hard drives together and see it as one big hard drive. Now, because we did that encryption, we're going to keep getting this message that's going to remind you about your encryption key. Once you are sure you're good on it, you can say don't show again. And now we want to go ahead and do a couple of useful defaults here. The first thing we want to do is enable a thing called data scrubbing. And this is going to be one of those really powerful features that helps protect your data long term. Enable data scrubbing, do it on all storage pools, and I do it every 3 months. It's a little bit overkill, but doesn't hurt anything. What this will tell the NAS to do is every 3 months, read every single file on itself, and using the BTRFS checksums and a lot of really great info that the actual file system has behind the hood, it actually checks these files for errors and corruption. So say one of the hard drive flipped a 1 to a 0. It'll be able to find that and fix it before it's a problem. The file system is able to recover from 1 error per section of file, but not 2. So by reading these every 3 months, we make sure that these errors don't stack up And anytime there is one, it's fixed without you even knowing about it. So you'll set this, you'll forget about it, and that way your data that you've not opened in 5 years is constantly getting checked and making sure it's not getting corrupt. We can also run it only outside of business hours. So we can say, hey, pause it between 5 a.m. and 11 p.m. so that it doesn't affect anything. As long as it runs within 3 months, this can be as few hours as you want it to be. And now we'll also just say run later. We don't need to run it because we've not got any data on here yet. The next thing we want to do is come into volume 1. Under our settings, we're going to remove out record file access time. This is a thing where the file system writes down every time a file was opened. Nobody ever uses it, and so it's unnecessary to have on. It just slows things down and makes things a little bit less efficient. And that is the basics. I do want to mention one other thing that's confusing to new users. So, as I said, I plugged in 2 4TB drives and 8TB drive. But it's reporting 10% less for each of those. That is because the unit we're actually seeing here is what's called a TB. TIB. When we bought the hard drive, it sold us the hard drive in terabytes. Now, this is one of those things that gets really confusing. It is the exact size you're expecting it to be. It is just telling you in a slightly different unit than you're used to. And it's actually what Windows uses, but Mac uses terabytes. But it's the space you were expecting it to be. Just know there's a slight unit conversion. It's kind of like if you gave me a unit in meters and I'm used to yards. They're pretty close, so the numbers look right, but they're slightly off. That's all it is. It's just a different unit. And you can look up a unit converter. So if we do our 3.6, we'll see that that is 4 terabytes. And this is where we can actually kind of get the rough value and see that. And that's why it is the size we're expecting it to be, just in a slightly different unit. Okay, so great. Now there's one last thing. As I said, I've got an SSD in this unit. So we're going to set up what's called an SSD cache. I've got a tutorial that goes way more in depth on this, but we're just going to go through a basic read-only cache. And I slightly underallocate them. I cover it more in depth in other tutorials, but I'm just going to go ahead and add that in right here. For most people, it's not a crucial upgrade. And so this right here is where we can see our SSD cache status. And finally, we're going to come into the HDD SSD column, and we're going to create a task to do a quick smart test. Under this task scheduler, we're going to run it once a month, probably at like Saturday, 2 a.m. We're going to run this thing called a quick test. The drives will basically just sit down, check their own data, make sure everything's good, and detect if they think they're going to fail soon. There is an additional option for what's called an extended test. I never really run them anymore unless a drive is showing issues. So run your quick test once a month, and then if you actually have some issues, you can go in and manually run an extended smart test. But now that is pretty much our storage volume completely ready to go. Now, while we were doing that, DSM also installed those 3 packages we requested it to. Synology Office, which is within Synology Drive, and Synology Photos. But we're going to get to those later on in the video. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this now, and we're going to open up Control Panel, and this is where you really set all of your settings. As I said, you want to create a new user account for every single person who's accessing the NAS, and this right here is where you do that. You just simply give them a username, generate a password, or give them a password, add them to a user group, and then here is where you give them permission to things. That is the basics of it, so if you want to give them access to Synology Photos, this is where you can do that. I'm not going to go over it super in depth here, but this is where you pretty much apply permissions to various things. The next thing we want to check out is what's called the shared folders. You can kind of think of these like different drives on your computer, and that's actually how they're going to show up. So for most people, if you're creating more than about 5 or 6 of them, you're probably doing something wrong. It could be easier. But this is where you're going to apply large settings, things like permissions, things like snapshots, things that all kind of are grouped together. So it makes a lot of sense to kind of separate them out depending on your workflow and things that are accessed very differently. For example, if you're a video editor, all of your video editing assets, your actual footage, everything is going to be accessed very differently than things like your accounting. So it makes sense to section that stuff off. But for things that are like just regular documents, maybe just put those all in one. There's a lot of ways to do this, and we're running over by far the simplest setup here that most people will work for. We can see one has automatically been created. It's called the Homes folder. And whenever you're thinking about this, this is basically the users folder in Windows, the home folder in Mac OS, or the home folder in Linux. So pretty much every new user you create will get their own home folder within here. And we can see that if we open up File Station, we can see that under shared folder, there's only one folder, but under File Station, we can see two folders. We come into Homes, we can see that we have a folder for every single user on the NAS. And I'm currently logged in with the account called Will. And so it's showing me this home folder right here. Really, this folder Will and this folder Home are the same thing. They're the exact same folder. It's just what's called a symbolic link that's just showing me it. So the only reason I get to see all of these things is the Homes folder is because I'm an administrator. I've got full access to everything on the NAS. But just like how if you're not an admin on Windows, you can't see anybody else's user folder, same thing that happens here. So that's all the Home versus Homes is. Really, the actual folder stored on disk is Homes, but then every person who logs in sees their own home folder on the side. So that's that first folder there. It can be quite confusing for new people. What I really recommend doing is never access anything or create anything in this Homes folder. If you do that, you're going to be messing with weird permissions and stuff. So stay away from that. And then only store things in your home folder that only you need to access. So for most businesses, you can actually just disable that if you don't want personal folders, and that makes things easier. So if you're going to have any files that everybody needs to access, it should always be in what's called a shared folder, not the home folder. One setting that I like to do is hit edit right here and hide the Homes folder. It helps people kind of understand it. It just doesn't show up in Windows File Explorer and macOS Finder. It just hides it so it's less confusing for new users. But now we want to actually set up a new shared folder. So we're going to create a shared folder. We can choose whether or not we want a recycling bin on there, and we can give it a name. This will be documents. And if you're running a business, this will often be something like an S drive, a shared drive, and you'll map everybody to it, and everybody will see this and be able to access files in it. If you have multiple volumes, this is where you select which volume it lives in. Now I'm going to skip over both of these two. These are really just for advanced users. Worm write once read many is very useful in a few niche use cases, and we don't need to encrypt it because the volume's already encrypted. Don't enable either one of these things unless you know what you're doing. Finally, every time we create a new shared folder, we want to enable data checksum for advanced data integrity. This will help your files in a really long term protect them. So always, always, always check that. And then in some cases, if you've got very compressible files, you can enable this. From my experience, it's pretty rare to get value out of it. And now we get to actually choose who has access to it. So this is where all of our permissions are held. There are ways to use what's called Windows ACLs or an access control list for further permission, but that's a little bit more advanced. But now we can choose, all right, Bob has a read-only or read-write access. And this is where we get to choose their permissions. You'll see this no access column. Never check that. If you're checking that, you are doing something wrong and you need to figure out what you're doing wrong. But if you're having to hit no access, you are doing something wrong. If you see right here, by default, nobody has access. So you shouldn't ever have to hit that no access button unless you're doing something weird. But we'll give Bob access to it. Okay, so now this is where we've got our shared folder. And if we wanted to, we could create multiple. Maybe there's an accounting department that has their own permissions and their own drive and it's totally separated. But that's all where you can manage those things here. Once again, there's a lot of stuff to it. We're going to keep it pretty simple with that. The next thing we want to go ahead and do is make sure we have set up a recycling bin empty schedule, because otherwise our recycling bin is just going to keep growing. So we're going to come into Tasks Scheduler at the bottom, and create a new task to empty the recycling bin. This is something I set up on every single NAS that I get access to, just because it's remarkably often how people will have multiple terabytes. I actually had a client have 60 terabytes in the recycling bin. And so we were about to build this new NAS for them and everything. And then we realized, oh, hey, 80% of your data is actually just in the recycling bin. Emptied it, didn't have to build a new NAS. So make sure to set up this task. We're just going to say empty bin, run it every day, and we'll keep files in the recycling bin for 7 days. So this will essentially every night look at every single file that's been in the recycling bin and delete any of them that have been there for more than 7 days. Pretty simple. You're going to set it and pretty much forget it. All right, so now that's out of the way, the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is actually connect to it. So this web interface that we're using right here, technically you can upload files via File Station right here and dump files in there. So this is where we can see our new shared folder that we had just created, and I can upload stuff and I can put files in here, but this is not how you really use the NAS. You will very rarely ever log in here except to change settings. What you will do, however, is access it via either Windows File Explorer or macOS Finder, and that can be done by coming into the Network tab on both Windows and Mac, and you should see a list of different devices on the network, and one of them being that computer name. You'll double click on it, and it'll ask for your username and password. That's the one that we set up for the NAS, and you'll just type that in. And here is where we can actually access it, and it's going to act like an external hard drive. So really, this is how you access it. You can see on macOS, when I double click on it, it shows up right here, and it maps the drive. In Windows, it'll show up under Network as well. You may have to hit this button that says Enable Sharing, but then after that, you'll see it and you'll be able to access files on it. And you can also right click and click Map Network Drive to have it always at a specific drive letter. So that is how you can do that and run everything. And this is actually what a NAS is. Really, this is how you're going to be accessing files the majority of your time. This is where you can essentially upload and download files to it and work off of it like an external hard drive. Except this is an external hard drive that's shared between multiple people. So I can just copy files over to it, edit stuff, delete stuff. It is going to be able to work just like any other external drive. You can open up files, close them, save them, however you want to work. It will just work. With the only exception being a few key pieces of software. The most notable is Lightroom. Lightroom Classic's catalogs, the .lrc file, they do not allow you to store it on a NAS. Your raw files and your actual original images can be on the NAS, but the LRC Lightroom catalog needs to be on a local computer drive. I've got a tutorial covering all of this stuff in a link in the description, but for the most part, it's just going to work like an external drive. And so you don't need to log into this web interface to access files. Really, you're just going to click on it right here and be able to see everything. Once again, I'm logged in with Will. So this home folder is Will's home folder, not Bob's home folder. And this is where you just add all of your files. Okay, so that's our rough overview of actually setting up and accessing files on the NAS. The next thing we need to do is kind of go over adding in packages, because the NAS can do so much more than just act as a basic file server. There are tons of packages, and the most key one is going to be what's called Snapshots. And I cannot overstate how valuable these are and how much they can save your entire file system from so many things. And it's also going to go over how to install new packages. So on the left-hand side over here, we can see our package center. If we click on it, we'll agree to the EULA, and we can see a whole lot of packages, as well as installed packages. We can see right here there are 2 packages that need updates. I'm going to go ahead and just update them. And so now that those are installed, we can now see other packages we want to install here. One of the most useful being Snapshots. So just search for it, and it's called Snapshot Replication. You can think of this like versions, Windows shadow copies, or kind of versions like Time Machine worked with Mac OS. What this will let us do is this will let us pretty much undo anything that's been done to our files, really easily and choose how long we want to go back to previous versions of files. It is incredibly efficient, and multiple times a month I get phone calls from old clients worried that they've destroyed everything and freaking out, and it becomes a 2-second undo. Somebody accidentally deletes the wrong file, saves over somebody else's file, gets a virus on their computer that encrypts every single file on the computer and has access to the NAS. All of that can be undone with a click of a button. Cannot overstate how valuable these things are. So we're now going to see that it's installed, and we'll open up in the app drawer in the upper left hand corner. Click on Snapshot Replication. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set up a snapshot schedule for every single shared folder we create. So we can shift select to do multiple, and we're going to hit Settings, enable a snapshot schedule. And for very, very, very basics, we do it every day from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. We're going to take a snapshot. You can think of this like a version. It's a point in time that we can roll back to. And this allows us to be able to go back to previous versions of our files every single hour. So this way, if somebody deleted a file or just saved over somebody else's work, you can go back to how it was at the top of the hour. And it is really useful, and it's not like it's taking up a bunch of space. If nothing changes, they take up no space. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I'm going to have like 800 copies of all my files on here because of this. No, it is really, really space efficient. And pretty much the only time it takes up space is when you delete a file. If you delete a file, you're going to keep that file on the hard drives until the snapshot expires that's last referencing it. So you'll be able to restore it, but you won't get your space back. And I go over this a lot more in depth on a separate tutorial that I'll leave a link down in the description below. Definitely check it out. A lot of people really stop using snapshots because they thought they were taking up space when they're not. The most important setting now is the retention settings. So this is essentially how long you will be able to restore files for. And this will say how long it is before you get your space back. So under our advanced retention policy, if I keep a snapshot of the week for 52 weeks, now when I delete a file, it's going to be held in a snapshot for an entire year. Meaning that that 1 terabyte file I deleted will not actually get space reclaimed from it for an entire year. So that's great if you don't delete files often and you need to be able to go back. But for most businesses, what I would recommend is 90 days. For the vast majority of people's cases, if a file was deleted and you've not noticed for 90 days, it's probably not that important of a file. But it really depends on your exact use case and what the file system is. So for a easy default for most people, keep all snapshots for 14 days. This way we get our hourly granularity for 14 days. Then between 14 and 90 days, we'll just have one per day. And so we won't have as much granularity, but we'll be able to go back 90 days. Now, realistically, there's not a huge amount of space taken up difference between taking a snapshot every hour or taking a snapshot every day. That's because unless you're creating and deleting a bunch of files within a day, if they were there yesterday, the snapshot will lock them in. So it doesn't really matter how often you take snapshots. What really matters is how long you're keeping them for. Really, this all boils down to thinking of it like a recycling bin. When you're thinking about the space these snapshots are using, they're effectively going to be like a recycling bin that gets emptied after 90 days. If you never delete any files, snapshots never take up any space. But if you delete 5 terabytes of files today, just like a recycling bin would stay in the recycling bin for 90 days, that 5 terabytes will not get back for 90 days, but you've got 90 days to restore it. I'll leave a link down in the description below that video that really covers it a lot more in depth for people who are interested in how all of this works. And now the last thing we're going to go ahead and do is make them visible so we can actually see them and allow our users to restore their own files. And I'm going to quickly take a couple of snapshots here manually just so we can see them and kind of see how they work. As I said, I just took 2 manual snapshots, and so we can now see that there's this snapshot folder right here that has a bunch of timestamps. This is kind of a virtual file system that lets us see what the files looked like when that snapshot was taken. It's not actually duplicating all the files in all these folders. These folders don't actually exist on disk. Instead, it's just basically recreating how the file system looked at that time. So we can come in and we can see a read-only copy of our files exactly as they were at every hour, every snapshot we've got. Now let's say we actually need to restore a file. Maybe it accidentally got deleted, or even just corrupted, or somebody got a virus on their computer that encrypted all the files. All we have to do is just go back in time, open up our snapshot, and we can see these are 2 snapshots I just manually took. And this is from 840. We're going to go ahead and open her on up. And all we have to do is copy them out of the past, go back into our main file system, and paste them back on in. This is how easy it is to restore files, and that is why they're incredibly valuable. That is all it takes to restore files that have been deleted or corrupted, or somebody got a virus on their computer or saved over anything. That is so useful. And viruses can't break the snapshots because snapshots are read only. Try to modify them, you can't. So that's where I'll end the snapshot overview. Really, anytime you create a new shared folder, always remember to add in snapshots. They will save you. All right, so now that covers how to install new packages. The next thing we're going to go ahead and do is just go over some basic settings in Control Panel that we need to make sure are on. Under File Services, right here, we can see SMB. SMB is how we're accessing the files. When we see it on the sidebar of Network right here, that is through a protocol called SMB. And we can check and ask it. We can see right here, SMB. So this is where all of our SMB settings are. There are logs in here. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do. If you want to use Time Machine, you can set that here. There's a lot of stuff in there, but for very basic use cases, I personally like to enable SMB durable handles. Then make sure your minimum SMB protocol is SMB v2, having SMB v1 disabled, and enable asynchronous read for highest performance. Finally, if you've got multiple network interfaces, you can look into this thing called SMB v3 multi-channel that can also get you better performance. But I'm not going to go over that in this tutorial. And finally, enable fast file clone. That will save you space. So when you copy and paste a file, because of how BTRFS works and some really cool stuff behind the scenes, you can copy and paste files without them actually taking up more space. So it'll look like they've duplicated. It'll look like it's taking up more space on your computer, but under the hood, it's kind of like instantaneous deduplication. Really cool stuff, and it just saves you a bunch of space. It's kind of hard to tell how much space it's saving you because to macOS Finder and Windows File Explorer, they're independent files that just don't take up extra space on the actual hard drives. Then if you're enabling AFP or NFS or FTP, you probably don't need those unless you really know what you're doing. Next up, we're going to go into our users and groups. This is where there's a lot of stuff we can do with various groups and other things like that. And I cover this in my family NAS setup as well as my office NAS setup to go in and really get this thing optimized for what you're using. But for people who are just starting out, create a new user for every single person who needs to access the NAS, and then simply set their permissions right here by just clicking on this permission tab and just saying what they do and do not have access to. That is the easiest way to get started. And don't touch the homes folder permission unless you actually know what you're doing and know why you're doing it. Don't add in read write to everything because now this user would be able to access everyone else's home folders. We want to make sure that the admin account and the guest account both say deactivated. This account right here, we can see it's in this group called administrators. That is how we get the administrator privileges. We don't ever sign in with this account labeled admin. Finally, under advanced settings for this, you can choose, hey, they've got to have special characters, can't have common passwords, and choose how long. Maybe you want everybody to have at least a 12-character password. For most security, 8 is sufficient, especially if you're including special characters. I do not recommend enabling password expiration Studies have shown it is not more secure. So if you're required to have password expiration, push back on that because it's actually less secure. And finally down here, you can choose whether or not to have that home folder, that personal folder for everybody by disabling it here. Next up is our external access. If we wanted to set quick connect, this is where we would do that, as well as some more advanced router configuration stuff that we're going to skip over. Under network, we can see our network interface. And this right here is the really important thing. This is how fast our NAS is connected to the network switch. See, this is 2.5 gigabit, which is pretty fast. 10 gigabit would be faster, but this will really control how fast your computer can copy files to the NAS. And you can also set static IP addresses and other things here. Those are generally for more advanced users. Under security, there's some things we want to make sure are done. The first being this adaptive MFA. This is great for security. You can enable it. And then also if you are running Office and you've got a good setup for two-factor authentication and you've got this thing externally accessible, you can enable 2FA right here as well. Under firewall, you probably do not need any firewall rules here, and you should probably leave this disabled unless you know how to write firewall rules and you're actually going to have it. Ticking this and hitting save does nothing. It will not make you any more secure. The default thing is allow all, so your firewall is effectively useless. So unless you're actually going to write firewall rules, leave that disabled. Now, protection and auto block are critical. Auto block makes sure that if an IP address is guessing passwords, it'll be blocked automatically. So 10 attempts within 5 minutes, keep somebody from trying to brute force the NAS. Don't make this like 3 attempts within 5 minutes because you're just going to be blocking people who type out their password, and it's not actually going to help you at all. Because with these settings right here, it would take 2.5 million years to have a 50% chance of brute forcing a password. So it's just not going to happen. So definitely leave these as great defaults, and then I recommend adding in block expiration. That way, if you lock yourself out, it'll be unblocked automatically, and it also keeps the list from getting too full. Finally, there are 2 more settings we want to go in. We want to go into notifications, and we want to make sure that this has on. This right here is where you're going to get an email notification automatically if something happens with the NAS. Really, really useful. So make sure this is checked on. And then under hardware and power, I personally like to make sure that this right here is checked. Restart automatically when power supply issue is fixed. So that way, if the power goes out, the NAS will turn back on when the power comes back on. And then other really useful thing, if the NAS is beeping because maybe you pulled out a hard drive, and now because of the RAID, it is saying, hey, I'm still running, but we've got a fault, it will start beeping at you. And with that, if you need to mute it, you can come in right here and hit mute. So it'll tell you why it's beeping and how to stop it from beeping. By the way, don't just pull hard drives out while it's running. That is not a good thing for your RAID to do. I'm only doing this because it's a test bench and showing you that. But we now have to rebuild our pool. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'll cover this in another tutorial. Okay, so I just went in and I'm now repairing the storage pool. So don't pull your drive out unless you're doing a tutorial. And I also personally disable hard drive hibernation. Doesn't save that much power, and that way the NAS is always snappy. Finally, under UPS, this right here is where if you've got an uninterrupted power supply UPS that's got a USB port on it, it can actually communicate with the NAS to say, hey, the power's out, go ahead and shut down. And so that way, if the power's out for 5 hours and you're out of town, the NAS will safely shut itself off before the battery dies. And especially if you're running certain configurations and it's really critical files for an office, I would highly recommend getting a UPS to make sure that you don't have unexpected power losses, as those can cause issues and cause you to have to restore from backups or cause your volume to go read only. And finally, I want to show you where the update button is. So if there's a new update of DSM, it'll show up right here. And this is where you can run that. All right, so now I want to go over a few key apps under the Package Center that are really great to use, and I'll also leave a link down in the description below. I've got a playlist that I built that has like my getting started tutorials to check out. Active Backup for Business Google Workspace, and MS365 are great for backing up computers, servers, your Google Workspace, or your MS365 account. So those can be phenomenal. Cloud Sync allows you to hook up to like Google Drive and automatically sync your NAS from Google Drive down, or a lot of other configurations and all other cloud services just about. exFAT access is great if you're plugging in a USB external drive. exFAT works on Mac, Windows, Linux, so it's very easy to recommend there. Hyper Backup is what you're going to use to back your NAS up, especially via the external hard drive. It's a really great place to start. Snapshot replication, we've already gone over. Storage Analyzer can be very useful if you're trying to figure out what folders are just taking up space and all these other things. It can also find duplicate files and other things like that. Surveillance Station, if you want to use this as what's called an NVR. VPN Server is phenomenal for getting external access to the NAS just through Windows File Explorer, macOS Finder. It's a great thing for Office is to install. And those are really the key core functionality. We've already added in Synology Photos. That is great for like replacing Google Photos. And Synology Drive, that can kind of create its own Google Drive. And there's so much more to this. As you can see, there's tons of apps and features. And I want to leave a link down in the description below that I built a playlist for this that actually has a lot of these tutorials. I'm going to go ahead and just pull that up now. So I built this playlist right here that's got a bunch of tutorials and really for Synology starters. I'm going to keep this up to date as things change and as I make new videos of things. So a few key ones to start out with is one, if you're looking for that family style, right here, this is a great place to start. It really covers photos and documents for just people who don't need a lot of understanding of how the NAS works. This right here, as I said, setting up a USB external hard drive as a backup is so useful. So this will go over how to set that up. Another one is Synology Drive, and this covers it right here. Synology Drive is very feature rich and allows you to access the NAS via syncing versus like an external hard drive. And there's some nuance there that can be a little bit confusing. That's why I'm not covering it super in depth in this tutorial. But this allows you to access your files remotely very well and also be able to download copies of them to your computer and have them automatically sync back even if you don't have internet. So that is really useful. If you're a macOS user, this is how to set up Time Machine to the NAS so it automatically backs up your computer every hour. OpenVPN is a great way to be able to remotely access your files, especially if you're in more of an office setting. I also go over every single one of the Synology packages and what they do in this tutorial. And for people who are using Lightroom, this covers an entire workflow for it, for really the best way to use Lightroom with a Synology. This right here is remote access, especially depending on what kind of remote access to the NAS you need. This covers it. This is my in-depth guide on Snapshots. And this is some common performance issues. So really understanding how to get the fastest speeds out of NAS depending on what you're looking for, as well as all the different ways to back this thing up and which one makes the most amount of sense. I cover that all here. By the way, if you have a tutorial that you really feel like should be in this playlist and you think new users would have value out of it, please leave a comment down in the description below. I am trying to keep this playlist up to date and really have useful stuff in there for people who are not overwhelmed by all the options and instead can kind of get focused on what things they're looking to do. And that is pretty much it for this tutorial. Covers the entire setup of the NAS right here. It is now off and running, and also the basic way to access the files on it just through Windows File Explorer or macOS Finder. Then for all the other things, you can go ahead and follow these tutorials and get up and running. If you have any other questions, put those down in the comments below. And if you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. And have a good one. Bye.